So let it be written. So let it be done. This is Tabletop Terrors. This is going to be beyond the rules, where we're specifically talking to game designers here. Anyone can listen, but just wanted to throw that up front that this is helpful information for anyone, I think, but is specifically designed toward people who plan on writing RPGs and releasing them in some form or fashion, professionally or semi-professionally. If you are an RPG writer or designer, I am telling you, you should start releasing stuff tomorrow. That is the thrust of this video, and we're going to tell you why I think, from our own experiences, which is really important. What I see so often are talented, brilliant creators who are in their lab, their cave, talking about a rule set that they've been working on for 3, 5, 7 years, or a game world. Again, these are people who have verbally said they plan on releasing this publicly. Now, the reason why you need to start releasing stuff tomorrow is because, in a very cold, real way, just being honest, in 2 years when you finish this thing and drop a 700-page PDF, there's not going to be any emotional investment from anyone other than you, because we have not learned to grow and understand this world as it's created. And so the reason why you need to start designing and releasing stuff like tomorrow is because you want to grow an audience with you. It doesn't have to be perfect. It does not have to be perfect. That's huge. That's really important. And so, we'll talk more about our experience with these things, but grow an audience with you. Let them learn your world. Let them learn your races, learn your lore. And that is my biggest tip, is don't expect people to be emotionally invested after having zero contact with your content, and you drop what is essentially, an almanac on them of 700 PDF pages. It probably won't turn out well. What about you, Jeff?
And so for me, this kind of, I'll approach this almost by way of an analogy, I think, to start with, that'll kind of illustrate. So I'm someone who takes theater lessons, like singing particularly, and some acting stuff as well. And something that my teacher told me very, very early on that really has stuck with me, not just for theater, but for everything creative, RPGs specifically, as I'll kind of tie this into, is when I was like 2 months into singing lessons. So I had just started. I was terrible still. He got a notice for an audition that was coming up from a local company nearby. And he basically just came up to me and was like, "Hey, so I got a notice for an audition that's coming up. I know you just started. I know that you don't necessarily feel comfortable with even, singing ability yet, but I want you to audition for this now, because auditioning is a skill entirely separate from singing in a lot of ways. Knowing how to introduce yourself to the panel, where to stand in the room, how to give your slate, things like that. Those are skills that you won't get singing, that you can only get by auditioning. And it would be a shame if you were a very great singer in 2 or 3 years and a terrible auditioner because you had never learned those skills. And that'll stop you from getting roles that you might otherwise be talented enough to get, but you won't audition well, and then they'll think that you're not good because you don't know how to audition, even if you're a great singer. So kind of tying that back into RPGs, it's easy to think that the creative side of RPGs is all that you need to really succeed. Of I can make a great world, I can make great mechanics. What's there to stop me? But things like knowing how to organize a book, what information to put in what order to make it read cleanly, how to give good art direction to put into the book, how to market the book to people so that people know what it is and people buy it, like what Tim was talking about. These are all skills that are important to the process too, if you're going to release a product. So if you can develop those skills as you develop your creative skills, you'll end up in a much better place much quicker than if you develop this amazing creative edge, but then you're stuck with no logistical skills to back that up, and you have to catch your logistical skills up before you can release the stuff that you want to have the impact that you want to. You'll never be able to have the reach if you don't have both of those skills at equal levels. So it have one way up here and another way down here. You're going to be releasing stuff at this level until you can bring it back up to where everything needs to be. So the more that you can start developing all of those skills in tandem, the further you'll get faster, because you won't need to play catch up later on down the line.
Yeah, and just like that auditioning where, hey, start it now. I'm assuming that you didn't get that audition because that was kind of the point. And that's the important thing is, but when you went, you learned what an audition was like and all of those things. It's the same I've found for programming. That's my day job. I do computer programming. And the reason I bring that up is because before I started, I read a lot of books on programming, and none of them taught me what it would be like to program. Because there are certain things you learn by doing it. When somebody, a veteran of something, when you say, how do you do X or Y? How do you know how to introduce yourself at an audition? A lot of times an answer you'll get from people like that is, well, you just kind of know. They learned that from experience. A lot of times when people say, well, you just kind of know, it's because you did it 1,000 times. In the case of programming, I've written, this kind of particular thing 1,000 times. By the 500th time, I'm like, oh, I'm kind of getting a pretty good handle on this. By the 1,000th time, I'm like, oh man, the way I did it 500 times ago was just preposterous. It was ridiculous. There's no other way in the world to build that than doing it. A lot of times people will take programming courses and they'll say, well, how do I start doing it? And it's just like that. Start applying for jobs that you may or may not, start trying to get the bid out there. But then more specifically go, oh, I have this problem and I want to solve it. Because until you start really applying yourself to, oh, I didn't think about how to split a string at a specific place. I now need to go learn how to do that, to do this thing I wanted to do. That won't come up. You won't get taught that. There's like a separate section to a lot of skills that nobody mentions in the books, that nobody mentions in the theory, because there's no way to teach it. It's experience, really. And so that's why it's so important to start doing something tomorrow that's going to be released. Because, yeah, you release it and 10 people see it and they go, oh, well, this needs a little work and that's cool. But you learned in one day, well, oh, I don't like the way I did my headings. It was confusing. That has nothing to do with RPGs. That has absolutely nothing to do with releasing. But how do you format it? All of those things are like, oh, well, it becomes your preference and your experience. And without getting out there and doing it, I said getting out there, obviously you can do this in your basement, but without doing it, you won't start to build the experience. And without the experience, I personally feel that you'll never be good at it.
Yeah. And so what I want to do is, let's do some practical, actual application of what can you do starting tomorrow, if you're watching this, to actually put this stuff into action. So what I'm going to do is we're going to talk about the campaign setting of Releasia, and you're going to Releasia thing. And so what you're going to do is I want you to think of the fact that Releasia has lived in your head for whether it's a week or 10 years or since you were playing D&D in the 70s, whatever. No one else knows it except you and your players. And the only way to get them to know it is to start writing about it and giving it to them. So there's a huge difference between the blob of shared experience and the good feelings and the wonderful memories you have with your gaming group and a cold, hard page with someone that has zero reference point. And I'm like, Releasia? Well, this doesn't make sense. It's referring to 3 different people that they didn't mention. And so it is a skill. So here's what I want you to do. I want you to pick any one thing about your world and then just write about it. And that one thing I would suggest probably would be a location. Or if you're not feeling a location, you can write if you're into mechanics, do a specific class write-up. Something simple like an archetype for 5th edition or a feat that's specific to your world. Pick anything and then just share it. I recommend the Absolute Tabletop Facebook group, which is the Facebook group that we're all a part of, and just say, hey, everyone, this is, the way that I describe fighters in my campaign setting of Releasia. Then do that every week. That's it. That's what you do. And it does not matter what you choose. Quick story. When we started, it was called Tabletop Terrors Publishing at the time. It became Absolute Tabletop. When we started that, we started it by writing a book called The Tieflings of Dragongren. Why? Why tieflings? because we had worked out a deal with an artist, and the art that he had was tieflings. It's unceremonious in a lot of ways getting started. It's very rare that you look at one of your favorite authors and go, man, their first book was a masterpiece. So in that case, we started with Tieflings of Dragongrin, and the mechanics were wrong. It was like racial spells. We didn't know. 5e wasn't even like fully out yet. It doesn't matter because we're here today. And so that's my point to you, is that what you will release might be weird and ugly, and it won't be what you're ever building it up to be in your head good. Because to get to that place where you've built it up in your head, you have to release for weeks and weeks. And eventually, like James said, you will get to the point to where you're like, oh, I'm comfortable with this now. I know what I want for feats. Why? Because I released 6 of them. 3 of them are awesome. 1 of them was terrible. And the rest were okay. So that is what I want you to do. Choose one small thing. I don't want you to choose the whole sandwich. I just want you to take a bite. 1 bite a week and release that. And that would be my tip.
Yeah. And for me, I'd say when you are making that one thing, start to pay attention to not just the content that you write, but like how you present it, and see if you can start to build up, to go back to my other analogy, the audition skills along with the singing skills. So instead of so when you write this, how you present fighters, think about how you position, like how you're going to put the heading in, and, can you format it so that it looks super clean and the layout of it is something that you could read in a book and be happy with. And like the others have said, the first time that you do it, it probably won't be the case. But just as when you sort of illustrate pieces of your world piece by piece over a year, week by week, if you start to tweak how you lay out a paragraph on your Google Doc page, or play with it in InDesign and actually try to make it look like a book page rather than just an information dump. If you do that week after week for a year or two, then not only have you made an awesome world that people are going to be invested in as they've kind of grown with it and with you, you'll also have developed, how to lay it out in a program. So that way, when you need to go to release it, you don't have to go like, oh, shoot, I don't know how to use a book layout program. Now I'm going to have to learn that and do that now. But if you've already kind of built that skill up going into it, then you have that in your back pocket too, so that you don't have to kind of work that up extra to be able to release the book. You can just know that you've developed that skill alongside it and then kind of have it all ready basically at the same time.
Yeah. And especially, let's say, in terms of 5th edition, when we started, when Tieflings of Dragongrim was coming out, like Tim said, first of all, 5e was still a playtest, I think. But there were plenty of things we didn't know about it, and we obviously didn't let that stop us. But for example, when we were writing more and more books, I learned how average damage of a monster was calculated. I didn't look that up. I didn't know I needed to know it, but at some point I was, making a stat block, say, and I was like, oh, how do they do that? And then you go find that. That's the sort of thing that teaches you all those little polyfills, as a word that I think most people don't know. But that idea of like you're spackling over the holes, because those aren't the things people are going to teach you. The other important thing is leaning into the idea that it's a skill, even to release something. It's important to remember that people aren't beholden to you, in the sense that, yes, okay, you release something every day, but they need a reason to care about it. Again, just like Tim said, they don't have a reason right now to care, so give them one, whether it's because you're really nice and they're interested, or it's just something that they think is very cool. But the major thing is, even though you're giving people something for free, it can feel easy to feel like they should like it just because it's free, or just because it's yours, or it's something they like. And it's important to remember that you will eventually get to a point where people can't wait for the next thing you do. But sort of the theme of this whole video is, just like until you get to that point where all of your experiences are high enough level, you do kind of have to just slog through that, people not really caring at the beginning to some degree, until you really work it out,
Yeah, and it gives them a back catalog of stuff to look back on when they do start to care. We're going to do a deep dive on this, and so we're going to talk a lot more because, you probably have some questions, and I think we do have some answers that we didn't get a chance to talk about in here. What if someone steals my ideas? How do I make the most of my time, all these things. I don't have time to design. There are a lot of different things we'll talk about and give you real world experience. But, this has been Beyond the Rules, talking about, designing games and what to do. If you like fun, creativity, and tabletop games, we're Tabletop Terrors, and we love that too. Subscribe and be sure to hit the notification bell so that you are notified when we have new videos. That's pretty much it. In the comments below, whether you are a game designer or not, I just want to know if there was anything in this video that you found interesting or helpful. What was there? Was there a nugget that you thought was really interesting? And is there anything that you'd like for us to talk about in terms of game design? A specific topic, I would love to know, and we would love to know. So, you want to do a Tabtarian toast?
May you mend the first break.
May you kill the first snake.
May you conquer everything you undertake.
Sláinte.
Sláinte.